Good evening, everybody.
There's the energy.
And we're back. We have got Greg, myself, Brody here tonight, and we also have a special guest with us, Ted Zangerly. Is that right?
Yep.
He's one.
All right.
All right. Yeah, Ted's going to be helping us moderate throughout the podcast, which is what Brody's also going to be doing here. But we need all the help we can get. So Ted came down today for his application, and for his interview, and we roped him into coming in here and helping us tonight. So we got a lot to cover though tonight, and as always, as we go, if y'all have any questions, please put them in the comments below. We're all going to be moderating throughout, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Before we get going, I want to include a very shameless plug here for Legendary Whitetails. They have got a very good Father's Day sale going on right now, and I'll pin that up at the top of the comments in case anybody is still shopping for Father's Day. You can check out what Legendary has going on. First thing we're going to be touching on tonight, guys, is buck rubs. Or should we talk about the turkey tour?
Oh, no. Turkey tour.
Okay.
We got some stats to get out of the way.
All right, yeah, okay. Here's the big news. The turkey tour is now over, if you all are not familiar with it. It was the public land turkey tour that we went on all spring. We basically lived out of a tent and chased turkeys around on public land for a couple months. It was pretty sweet. And we've been getting a lot of questions about a number of things regarding the tour. So Greg compiled a list of stats here for you guys. We hunted 10 states total? That's it? Okay. I was thinking it was like more than that, like 11 or 12, but maybe it was only 10.
Yeah, 10. That's like a fifth of the
Yeah,
states you can hunt, so it's not bad. It's a good start.
Oh, Dave and Chubbs, they had to went to 30 states.
Yeah.
Those guys are freaking crazy. We traveled between 8 and 10,000 miles.
Roughly.
Jeez.
Yeah, 8,000 miles minimum. That was like the round trip to the places, and of course there's all kinds of driving, scouting, and
No
hunting.
wonder
So
my vehicles break down all the time.
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of miles for the hammer.
Yeah. Number of times we had to pick up and move camp. Twice.
I can think of two.
We got
It
booted
was
out of
probably
camp.
just two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we first started there.
Yeah.
Working out the kinks a little bit.
Yeah. Number of turkeys harvested. We've got that question a bunch.
That was just a rough estimate, somewhere between 35 and 40.
And that's within our entire group. That's
Right.
like
Private land guys.
Kansas buddies.
Yep.
Everybody in our crew, and then anybody that would have hunted with us along the way. I guess any of the videos on the entire turkey tour. 35 to 40
Somewhere
birds.
in that neighborhood.
Number of birds missed, 2. Me and Derek, I'm assuming. Is that right?
Oh, that's right. That's 3. I'm going to throw AJ Gall under the bus.
Oh,
He missed that
AJ.
one.
AJ, buddy. Yep.
I forgot about Derek missing that one.
3 misses.
He almost got by.
Oh, man.
Who's the other one?
Me.
Okay, you said it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I said it
I
up
just
front.
wanted to
I
make
said
sure.
it. Yep.
All right.
3 birds missed. The heaviest bird was Greg's. Pretty sure.
That's about the only one that we actually measured.
The Iowa?
Or measured. Weighed. Yeah.
I mean,
Iowa
it
one
was that bird and the big Miriam
Merriam's.
that
Jake's Merriam's.
killed. Those, and yours was 26.5 pounds.
Right.
That was probably the heaviest turkey, or close to the heaviest turkey. Jake's was around that also. But number of pizza pockets consumed, 100? I was thinking that'd be more like 1,000.
Roughly. I think Mindy made them in batches of 50. And I think we took 2 batches of 50 with us on our trips.
I've ate 3 today.
Deer season was probably 1,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and last but most certainly not least, the shortest bird was mine in Mississippi, 43 inches. So I'm a short bird king this year. And the longest bird is, Greg has disputed written on here. I guess.
Brody
I'd
agrees
agree.
too. It is disputed.
Yeah.
There was no witnesses to the...
There was no witnesses,
winner.
and there's not really an exact science to how in the world we're doing this. So, but anyway, longest birds were Greg's Iowa turkey, which was also the heaviest bird, at 50 and a quarter is what we thought, and Jake's Mississippi bird, which continues to get longer, I think, all the time.
It's like a fishing story.
And we think it was 51 or 52 inches long. The interesting thing, though, is that yours was the longest bird, or one of the longest birds, and the heaviest bird, and it was a 2-year-old turkey.
Yes, it was. Yep.
A lot of folks say, oh, it's a 2-year-old, he's not a very heavy bird, or he's got a short, thin beard or whatever. Like, no. 2-year-olds will get huge. They'll
Should have
dwarf.
let him get another year on him.
Yeah. Too bad.
Who knows what he could have been as a 3-year-old.
Yeah, real good genetics down there in that river bottom, too. That's just a shame. But anyway, that's all the stats for the turkey tour. If y'all want to hear more of those, let us know. I'm pinning a comment here for everybody. Ted Miller was the hashtag Longbird. That's right, Ted was. He had like a 90-incher. I forgot.
How could we possibly forget that? Ted lined them up, and it was like 87 inches or something like that. Yeah, it was. So Ted is the winner.
Ted is the undisputed winner. But because we never classified whether or not a longbird was actually one bird. It's 2. Longbirds. Hashtag longbirds. Anyway, enough nonsense. We're going to also talk about the public land whitetail tour that we're planning on doing this fall. Lots of planning and preparation is going into that right now. Before we touch on that, we want to dive into buck rubs. There's lots of questions about rubs. We could talk probably for multiple podcasts just about this one subject. If we had Ted Miller here, we would talk for weeks about rubs. And at some point we will, because we're going to get Ted on here talking to us about his horizontal rubs and stuff like that. But tonight, I want to discuss buck rubs, and we've got a bunch of trail camera pictures from last fall. We actually set up a camera. Oh man, when was that, Brody? July, August last year when we set it up on that
That's probably
signpost?
late July, early August, I think.
Yeah, we set up a camera over a signpost rub, and we left it there from late summer all the way through. I mean, when Jake killed that
December
buck.
2nd, I think is when.
Yeah, when Jake killed that deer on December 2nd. So we left it pretty much all the way through the pre-rut and, velvet shed, the pre-rut, and through the middle of the rut. And then we pulled it in early December. So it soaked there for several months over this well-used signpost rub. And we actually got a lot of really cool photos from this. And we're able to observe, how frequently the deer were using the rub and what time frame the rub was hit the most. And it's really interesting. When we found this rub, that thing really stood out.
Yeah.
It was in an area with a lot of bucks in it. And this rub we found in late summer, like Brody said, and it's a signpost where, like 4, what are those, maple trees?
I think they were. Yeah, just a bunch of trunks.
Yeah, like 4 trunks come out of the ground. One of them even kind of goes horizontal, and all of them were rubbed. You could tell that they'd been rubbed annually for a long time. Or perennially. That may be the better word. Annual. Okay, whatever. I'm not the best at dictionary. So anyway, they were. It was something that was getting used every year. So we put the camera over it, and as you can see right now, if you're watching this live, it's pretty interesting just to see the deer interact around that rub. You actually have a lot of pictures of mature bucks coming past that rub that never even touch it. And I think the biggest deer is that one that you and Jake had underneath the stand when you guys didn't have tags.
Mm-hmm. Like opening day or just after, I think, right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so the deer we're showing now at the rub is the one that I'm going to show the video to here.
Oh yeah, that's the big 8, isn't it? Yep. And that's the one that Brody and Jake had come in out of that bedding the first night they sat there with no tags, which was a huge bummer because that would have been probably one of the coolest hunts of the year. With that buck coming straight out of that bedding area that we scouted, and that deer kind of boogered out from underneath you guys that night.
Mm-hmm, a little bit.
And that rub's only about 250 yards from that stand.
Mm-hmm.
And from that time and all the way through the rest of the fall, I think we got him on camera a bunch during daylight right there.
Yeah, there was a span of 7 or 8 days from the end of October to early November where he's on there in daylight 4 different times, I believe. And the buck that Jake shot was also on there. He was probably on there more than any other deer.
Yep.
Buck, I should say. And that's a picture of him right there. And you can just see how big of a body, how old that deer is. I mean, when he shot him in early December, the deer looked big and old. Mm-hmm. But here you can really tell. I mean, just 5 to 7 year old deer. I mean, there's no really good way to tell. But
yeah, we got hundreds of pictures off of the rub, and there's at least 2 or 3 mature bucks in that location that are using the rub, including a lot of younger bucks. But if I recall, the older bucks were the ones that made that really aggressive big rub on that tree, weren't they? Wasn't that? I think that, I mean, as you look at these pictures, you'll see that rub sort of materialize throughout the fall, as more deer hit it and stuff. And that big 8-pointer, the one that you guys had underneath the stand, is the one that got really aggressive with it, and he just torched that tree. And it's like in a matter of minutes. Like there's a few sets of pictures of him hitting it. I remember looking at it, and that's like the most significant rub made in this signpost rub ring all fall, and it's by that big 8-pointer, and he made it in just a matter of minutes. Now, that thing rubs that tree multiple times, but really he only shreds it, if I remember right, like that one time.
Yeah, it just played where he shredded it.
And the rest, and you're still getting pictures of him throughout the fall, but many times he's just coming by and he's sniffing it, he's scent checking it, he's using, that one limb is almost like a licking branch, or he's just moving through the area. So it's kind of interesting to look at that thing and think, we happen to have it on a signpost rub in an area where there's a lot of trail intersections, where there's a hub, essentially, of deer activity. But if you were just setting up over a big rub like that in the woods and waiting for a buck to come by it, and say that was the only mature buck in the area that was hitting that rub, think of the odds of that thing coming through there. Like, he hit that rub like twice, maybe, in the entire fall. Now, he came by there quite a bit, but that's the difference in just a random big rub in the woods and a signpost rub like what we have here in a hub location right outside of bedding. You have lots of those deer that are just cruising past that location. Well, what other questions do you have about rubs a while ago?
I was just wondering, it's kind of along those same lines, but like, how do you know? I know a lot of times when we're going in, when we were hanging hunting this fall, we'd walk in kind of scouting as we walked in, and we'd see rubs, but we keep walking. How do you know when to stop and hunt? Maybe hunt over it or hunt in that area.
Right. Like as you're going in.
Yeah. Or even if you're just scouting during the fall or in the season.
Well, we typically associate any rubs that we find to bedding of some sort. And, I mean, we were scouting earlier today in the hills, in wooded hills, and we were finding big rubs really all over the place in there. But we're only associating those rubs with either rut travel or bedding. And many times on the points of those ridges where we were finding the most good buck bedding, within 50 to 100 yards of that bedding, you would find clusters of big rubs. And if you're sneaking in there in the fall and you know where that bedding is from your prior scouting, and you start seeing rubs opened up, especially early in the year, like especially late September, early October, if you're sneaking in there and you see those rubs are opened up, that tells you right then and there that there is most likely a buck using those bedding areas that you've already scouted. So that tells you that you should be setting up. Like you just asked, like how do you know when to set up on rubs? If you're moving into a location and you know where the buck's bed, typically, and the exit trails leading out of those bedding areas are lit with fresh rubs, then sit there.
Okay.
And if they're not, that doesn't necessarily mean the buck's not there. He still could be there, but the likelihood is probably quite a bit less. At least that's my opinion on it. I don't know. I mean, that could be wrong. But, when we found a lot of good buck bedding, though, within 100 yards of that rub, and that's why we left the camera there all fall. We weren't going to be able to go in there and check it. We knew that we were going to blow up quite a bit, if we did that. So we left that thing just soak all year. And that's why we were able to get this type of intel on their behaviors, because we didn't mess with it. We also hung the camera, as you all can tell, it's kind of up off the ground a little bit. We hung the camera with a climbing stick and then pulled the climbing stick out with us. So it was, how high was that? 8-10 feet maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
And it was pointed down at the rub. And the deer never paid a lick of attention to that camera. And I don't think any hunter saw it either, which is helpful. It doesn't get your camera stolen, but boy, there's just like a 10-12 day period in there where if you could have found a way to get into that location and sat there all day, you'd have seen at least one mature buck, maybe more.
So there is no good way to get in there, I'm assuming.
No, I mean, you and I went in there once early in the season when we had that buck come in at last light. Remember when we hung that stand in that tree? It was a complete rodeo.
Oh, yeah.
It was after the boys had the big one come underneath them. And we had a nice buck come in right there at last light, but we blew up some stuff getting in there. We saw another hunter going in that night. And using that ditch, you can get back there close to that rub, but you can't quite get to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're still going to be 75, 80 yards from it. Granted, those deer, a lot of the traffic is west to east, and that would actually be heading towards that ditch. But still, it's right. It's not quite in the middle of bedding, but it's right on the very edge, and they can see you coming from there. Like it's in a bedding area, so it's very hard to get in there. I mean, if you had the correct conditions, it would be a good spot to hunt on like a windy, wet day around that 30th through the 7th or 8th, like what you were just saying, where you could slip in there and climb up in a tree, and maybe some of them would be none the wiser. But
Tim has a good question here. He said, do you use Wonderground to match up the wind to the date? And what was the most common wind?
Yeah, we do, but we haven't really looked at it in this case just because they were there so much. And it kind of just depends on the situation. If we're looking at a camera where we only have a few pictures of a mature buck, for instance, then it's much easier to quantify that. But in this instance, we were having, 4 or 5 different rounds a day of mature bucks for 3 weeks at a time. And the entire area surrounding that rub is bedding. And it's a lot of, I guess you could say, not wind-based bedding because it's flat. Remember how flat it is down in there with all those cedars and crap? I mean, they can bed on multiple winds back in there. It's a primary bedding area. So, yeah, that's definitely a good idea to historically check it on Wonderground. We've done that a bunch in the past.
Yeah, I did that the year before with that one camera that I'd left all season long, and actually found I was hunting that location on a north wind, any northerly wind, and at the end of the season I did what Tim was describing there and matched up all the mature buck sightings in daylight to the wind for that time period, and I found that like 75% of those encounters were on a southerly wind. So that going into it the next year, that gave me the idea that I need to try to hunt it on a southerly type wind. For whatever reason, there was some kind of correlation between wind and when those mature bucks were moving in front of that camera.
We actually used Wonderground a few years ago when Sean and I were hunting on that wind switch day at the buck nest. We went in there and got in there like middle of the day, right at the end of October, I think it was. And it was a warm front that was coming in. So it was going from a northwest wind to a straight south wind, and it was pretty brisk all day. And it was actually going from northwest around, so clockwise. So going from northwest to north to east, and it ended up in the south. And it only took a few hours for that wind switch to occur. And when we were setting up the stand at like 2 in the afternoon, we looked up and one of the biggest, oldest bucks at the buck nest was walking across the middle of that open field, heading into another bedding area, right where we just walked. He was basically going from bedding area A to bedding area B, and we were assuming he was doing that because the wind had switched. And we looked back at Wonderground, after the season when we got to thinking about it and looking at the footage, and we're like, man, he probably went in there to bed in bedding area A on a northwest wind, and then in the middle of the day the wind switched on him and his bedding was compromised in some way, so he's moving to another one. Granted, he's probably only moving a few hundred yards away, but still, it's pretty eye-opening stuff to do that.
Nathan's got a question. He said, if you had to pick scrapes or rubs, and what time frame?
Oh man, that's tough. Probably, we pay a lot more attention to rubs early in the year. And scrapes for that matter. But it sure seems like Zach and I screwed up once pretty bad earlier this year. It's actually the same night that you guys saw that big 8. It might have been the first day of the season.
It was October 4th.
It was 4th, yeah.
October 4th?
Yeah.
First time out.
We went in that day, and of course, an early season like that, you don't have as many rubs because they're rubbing all throughout the month of October. And as Greg mentioned, the intensity is picking up all the way through Halloween and the start of November. So you have less rubs in the early part of the year. That means that when you find fresh rubs during that time, you really need to be thinking about where those are in association with bedding, because bucks don't move very far during that time, during late September, during early October. So if you're finding rubs, you're probably pretty close in the first place, or you can at least backtrack them in there. Zach and I, we scouted an entire public piece that night on the 4th. I mean, we walked like 400, 500 acres of this place. It was just ridiculous. We walked for hours and hours and hours. And it probably wasn't that much, but it was a lot. And that's what we were looking for mainly, was try to cut some rubs and then backtrack at the bedding. Well, we eventually came across a set of 6 to 10 pretty good sized rubs leading up this ridge, and we walked up there, and we should have just set up right there at the rubs, because the rubs ended up being only about 80 yards from 2 bedded shooter bucks, and we bumped them. We bumped them right out of the beds. And as soon as we did that, we're like, well, the heck with this. Well, let's look around. And we got to looking around, and within a 100-yard ring around where those bucks were bedded, it was rubbed up like crazy. But then you got any further after that, and they thinned out really fast. There was acorns on that ridge that they were on, and they were standing up, rubbing and eating on acorns most of the night, I'm sure. And then bedding right back down in different areas of that ridge. So, yeah, I guess to answer that question in my long-winded ways, you pay more attention to rubs early. And then scrapes become, a much bigger deal in the middle part of the month, towards the end of the month. Especially bedding area scrapes, I would say. Bedding area scrape can be good any time of the year, though, too. What other questions? I saw we had a bunch.
Jaron asks, when you find a good bed and decide to hunt it, do you wait for a cold front, or do you just go in when the wind's right?
Depends on how close you can get to it. Depends on how close you can get to the bed. If you can get really, really close, within 100 yards of it, then hunt it. And, if you know a deer is there, a buck is using it, or if you're confident that there's a buck there, then go in there and hunt it. If you can't get within 100 yards, there's no way, and you have to set up at 150 or 200 yards, then wait for one of those high movement days, like a cold front or whatever, because they're just going to move further from that bed in daylight on those days. There was a bunch of questions I saw on there a while ago, and I don't know.
We're getting a couple questions about horizontal rubs. People asking where to put them in relation to bedding. Maybe we can touch briefly on that, but we want to leave that subject for Ted Miller when we get a chance to get him in here.
Yeah, I mean, Ted, we've been on Ted's farm, and he places them in the middle of the bedding area or right on the edge. And I think that's why he has such good success with them. He's essentially putting them in the same type of areas where we had that camera last fall over those signpost rubs. And that's what he's creating, is a signpost rub. He's not just going out there and putting a horizontal rub in the middle of a food plot. He's taking them and he's identifying where trails cross, where there's already kind of a hub location within the bedding area, and then he's putting a horizontal rub right there, which almost just sweetens it up. And like he said, it stops the deer in front of the camera for a shot, because he's hunting in some super thick bedding.
Yeah, it's thick, and he's usually self-filming.
Right. So most of the time, that's where he ends up putting them.
We'll let Ted elaborate on that subject whenever he gets a chance to come over and sit in here with us. Have you ever put a camera on a bed? Is it worth the risk of scent from checking it?
Yeah, we did. We've done that a few times, actually. And we got some kind of cool pictures, but not a ton. And I actually bought a cell cam a few years ago just for that. I wanted to be able to set it up over a bed so that we could monitor it throughout the season and just learn, but for that very reason, because we didn't want to be going in and out of there and putting a bunch of pressure on the spot. But I don't know, we got some intel from it. They're just so hard to set up where you get pictures, because usually when you're in a bedding area, there's not just one bed, there's like 10 or 15 or whatever, and they're all in a circle or whatever. So, and you can only point your camera at one spot. It's not like there's a trail that all of them are walking by at any given time. So if you pointed at one of those 12 beds, you're going to occasionally get a deer to lay in that one. But it doesn't really give you a good idea of how often the bedding area is getting used. Does that make sense? But that's at least what we saw. I mean, and it was very difficult to get it set up right, because I was always paranoid about setting a camera like right in the bed itself. Always wanted to climb up a tree and point it down and have it kind of set off 10 yards or something, so that you would kind of keep the scent directly out of the bed. But
yeah, I think when you put them up, it was more out of curiosity and just wanting to learn, rather than anything that was going to contribute to a hunting strategy that year.
For your public land trail cameras, when and how often do you check them?
Depends on the trail camera strategy that we're using, that we're employing. We use a short-term trail camera strategy a lot of times during the season, where we set them up way back off of bedding, like out in an ag field that's close to the parking area, that's easy to access over a scrape or something. And we lock the hell out of those things to try to keep people from stealing them, but they still steal them at times. And basically, we're just setting them up in those areas where we have a chance of getting a mature buck on that camera at night, and we can monitor hunting pressure going in and out if it doesn't get stolen, you know. And we check those fairly regular. You know, we'll check those once a week or once every 2 weeks throughout the season, because we don't really care about leaving human scent up there at that scrape. And to be honest, the bucks don't really care either. They're using that thing at night anyway, and they know by the time they get to maturity, they know that when they're out there at night and they're smelling humans around that scrape, that it's a typical thing. Like, they're used to that. That's why they're there 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. But we're trying to get a picture of them so that we know they're there, A, but then we backtrack them to bedding, B. You know, then because we've already scouted that area, we already kind of know where the bedding is located at. Then we think about the direction in which he came from and think about the available buck bedding that exists in that direction, and then move in from there. And the other trail camera strategy is the one that we've been showing on this show tonight, is that where you leave them soak all year, and you're just basically trying to get more, you know, information for the following year, or information in general. And those are really my favorite ones. I mean, those trail camera setups like that one, you learn so much from that one, and like that camera that you had set up a few years ago. Granted, you check that thing more often. Yeah,
because I was hunting in there, so I was able to check it a few times throughout the year. But then going back at the end of the season and correlating every buck sighting and daylight to wind direction, as I think Tim had described earlier, was really helpful. How was your cell cam experience? Would you, was it worth the money? Is it worth the money?
I don't know. I think it just depends on the application. Depends on what you're wanting to use it for. To be honest, we looked at it this morning before we went out scouting, and I said something like, I spent $500 or $600 on that thing, and it's just sitting out here collecting dust, because I don't want to activate it again. I might just end up using it as a regular trail camera at some point, but I don't know. It's okay. I mean, the one that I have is older, so they've updated them a lot more since I bought that one. I'm sure the technology's way better now, but when I had it, I had to pay for, like, I guess, essentially the bill every month, the cell phone bill that it costs to run the thing, which is like $20 per month that you have it out there, and you can only get a certain number of photos. And then when the photos come in, they're pretty blurry because they have to really down-res them in order to send them through, the cell cam itself. So when I get pictures, it was super blurry and pixelated, and it was hard for me to really even tell what was going on. Now, when I went and pulled the camera, I got the card out, and I could look at the pictures in full res, and I could tell everything that was happening. But that was my experience with it anyway. I mean, it's okay, I guess. I don't know if I'd get another one, just because I'm scared to death somebody's going to steal it.
I've had a few people suggesting that we should measure the deer. #longbuck.
Oh, we got some cool ideas. We're not gonna unleash those tonight, though. We'll leave those for this fall. But yeah, oh yeah, we've got some special measurements coming down the pipe for the bricks. No doubt. How often are you guys using ozonics units? Michael Woods asked. I don't think we use them at all. I don't think we did at all this year. We used to use them some, but just don't want to pack extra stuff to the woods with us, I guess, because we all got so much stuff already. So we worried more about what the wind is doing.
Scott Pierce asks, do you guys get stuff stolen often?
Mm-hmm.
Every season we get something stolen, whether it be a tree stand, trail camera, or a card out of a trail camera.
Yeah.
But it's not so often that it discourages us from using trail cameras, that is.
Yeah, I mean, not a ton, but some. We used to get stands stolen a lot, but now we usually pack our setups in and pack them out and don't have that issue anymore, which is actually a pretty good way to go. You know, it takes a little more time to get everything in the tree and get set up. It's kind of more of a pain in the butt at times, but it's not a bad way to go.
Let's see, Ian asks, what percentage of your scouting is online versus what you find in person?
I would say more online, maybe. More on the maps, on the computers. Because there's a lot of spots we look at and then we don't go to.
Yeah, for Zach, I think that's definitely the case. I think he stays up late at night looking at maps all the time.
Yeah, he'd drink a cup of coffee at 7 o'clock. I would just sit in there and look at stuff. Yep. No, we look at maps way more. And just try to narrow things down from that point. And then go in with boots on the ground like we did this morning. And even like we did this morning in the hills, we were talking about you can get close with a map. Once you've looked at enough of them, you start to get an idea, you know, especially in your own specific areas, because it's going to change across the board. You start getting an idea of where you ought to look, you know, to try to find mature bucks. But every time you get in there, it's very rarely at that exact spot that you picked on the map. It's somewhere close to that, within a few hundred yards of it many times. But there's usually a curveball in there somewhere that you have to look boots on the ground to really figure out. When you're hunting with a bow, that info is very crucial. Got anything else, boys?
Would you use 4 Muddy Pro sticks or 5?
Either or. Just depends. Depends on the tree that we're hunting. If we scout a tree or a location ahead of time, like right now in the summer, and we notice that the tree is straight and tall and we need to be 25 feet up there or 20 feet up there, we'll make a note of it on our maps when we're there, and then we'll bring 5 sticks.
Mm-hmm.
I think you usually bring 5 if you can.
Yeah, I like 5 because that'll get you up to 17 to 20 feet maybe. But I'm just trying to think back over some of the deer we've shot in the past few seasons, and I know some of them have been relatively low.
Oh, yeah.
Like your marsh buck a couple years ago, that was 12 feet up.
Mm-hmm. Decoy buck was maybe 15 feet.
Yeah. So I think going into these areas, you know, doing the hang and hunt style hunts, a lot of times you're hunting deer in a spot where they haven't been hunted before, and you know you can get away with a little bit shorter height of a tree stand, just catching them off guard.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the exact situation that you're in, but I would prefer myself to be between 14 and 16 feet, somewhere in there, or even 10 if it's doable, you know, which most times you can't get away with that, but the lower that you are, typically the better angle that you're going to have at the deer when they're out there at your shot distance of 15 to 25 yards. If you get up really high, 30 feet in the tree, you've got a terrible angle at them when they're right underneath of you. And that makes me a little nervous, but don't get busted as much the higher that you go.
Greg asks, in a big woods setting, on an out-of-state public land scouting trip, what do you look for potential bedding areas?
Exactly what we looked for today.
That line.
Yep. When you're looking at a topo map in big woods, rolling timber, you're trying to find the locations way back in there that nobody is messing with, number one. So the hardest to get to spots. Yeah. And then you're looking for the prevailing wind in the area, which up here is normally a westerly type of a wind. So you're going to be looking at more east-facing type of topography, right? Because that's going to offer them in the hills with timber like that. It's most of the bedding is wind based, so they're going to be on the east facing slopes with winds coming out of the west. There's going to be deer stacked on there. And what we found today is you find way more beds on those subtle little points that run out off of those secondary ridges, and those little bowls that run up, in between the ridges. The deer will bed at the end of the bowls and on the end of those points. They'll bed, and you could see it as soon as we found the beds. It makes perfect sense why they're there, and it's open a lot of times. That was the thing today that we really noticed was man, there's no cover here hardly at all. But the deer is laying out on the end of those points, and he's got the ridge behind him with wind blowing down the ridge, and then he's looking out over that bottom below him.
The one thing you said today was that they could see almost all the way around them. Because we came to some points that were similar to where we found a buck bed, but they weren't there. But it was because they couldn't see as much as they could at some of those other spots.
Right, and you couldn't tell that from a map. They all look the same on the map. I mean, you got 10 ridges that run out, and they all look very similar from a topo map. But once you get there, you start figuring out that each ridge is slightly different than the next one. Some of those ridges are flat on the top, leading out, and then they drop off real steep. Well, a deer won't bed up on that flat spot. Does will, but a buck won't usually because he can't see anything. He just sees sky on either side. He can't see where a predator would be coming from the downwind side. That's why they choose those little points that kind of round off at the end. And it's the same case when you get in steeper terrain like that. They're always going to, when you find the beds, it'll make a lot of sense. And then in that specific area, you're going to find more just like it. That's what we had to do today. We didn't really know exactly what we were going to find when we went in there, but we went in, we found some rubs, we found some scrapes, and we found some trails. And then what did we do? We took those trails and we followed them back, and that led us back to those little points on that leeward side of the prevailing wind. So that's more so what we're looking at in big woods situations. Any type of habitat diversity that you have around the edges of those big woods too is going to help. If right across the boundary on private you have hay fields or crop fields or something, and then big woods on your side, on the public side, those spots can be really good, especially if they're at the back of the property where very few people will go, or if they're across a few steep gullies to get there, a few steep ditches. That'll keep people from going back there too. That's the thing though. Those deer in those big wood situations, they just don't need a lot of thick cover to bed like that. They just use that topography to their advantage. And then they cruise on the downwind side, the leeward side of those hills. You saw where all those rubs were today. It's all on one elevation.
We can probably do a podcast on this subject.
Oh yeah,
this summer and just and show with the maps exactly what we're talking about here. It's a little bit hard to conceptualize, just by looking at us talking, but we'll do more in depth with the maps.
We're actually going to do some kind of mapping series for whitetails within the next month and a half or so. It'll be 4 to 6 episodes, and it'll just be essentially taking a property that we've not been on from start to finish. So we're going to identify the spot on a map. We're going to pick a state, maybe Iowa, who knows. And then we're going to dive into that property more in detail and discuss what we do in order to scout it and find places to hunt.
And then also what we just discussed here about what we found this morning, that will be on our YouTube channel probably in the next 5 to 6 days.
Yep, we filmed a pretty cool scouting segment this morning. We're trying to get into some different terrain types for you guys so that we can, discuss those instead of just the marsh bedding and the river bottom stuff that we've been doing. We kind of hunt. We live in a location where we have access to some pretty diverse terrain, so it's pretty fun. What else we got for questions, guys?
How much of the hunting beast tactics will you be following this season, or do you prefer a more conservative approach?
No, we use a lot of the hunting beast tactics. We're friends with a lot of those guys on the hunting beast. It's a pretty awesome forum. Lots of good people on there. And I've learned a lot there over the years. But, regardless of which tactics you use, you need to get out there in the field and practice whatever you learn so that you can adopt your own sort of style. And that's really when it starts to get fun. Because then you start to learn how to adapt to what works best for you, and so on and so forth. Then you can have the most enjoyment possible out there, So, whatever. Yeah.
Do y'all look for pinch points, or are they usually overhunted?
They're overhunted for the most part. If we're looking for pinch points, it's not your typical pinch point that we're looking at. It's a funnel that is kind of inconspicuous, not as obvious to a person looking at a map. There's lots of obvious funnels that will stick out on an aerial photograph when you look at them. And if it's on a public area, everybody's going to go to that spot. I mean, even if it's way in there. Because the time you have the most pressure, at least in our area, is that first week of November. That's the time when the bucks are doing a lot of cruising. So that's the time when they think they need to hunt the funnels the most. Well, they can go and they can kill bucks in those funnels, but you're rarely going to kill the biggest buck and the oldest buck on the property there. He's seen that, done that before. Mm-hmm. He's too smart to go through a tight funnel, and especially in daylight like that, even if it is during the rut. They will do it some, but we definitely don't see it very often. Seems like when we kill a big mature buck, he's doing something completely different than the rest of the deer are doing.
Will you try saddle hunting?
Yeah, we might. We might try that some.
Our friend Jim Reiser has just been raving about saddle hunting. He said, I don't think I do anything else but saddle hunt from now on. So, yeah, I think we're going to have to give that a try.
Oh, Darren asked a cool question here. Could you describe a plan of attack in areas like you deer hunted in Mississippi? I'm assuming he said like you turkey hunted in Mississippi.
Yes, he corrected himself. Okay.
Places where deer have every type of habitat at their disposal on most of the land available to hunt. We saw a decent amount of deer sign in Mississippi this spring, but way more last year. We hunted a different area when we were down there last spring, I guess spring of 2017. And you definitely saw the transitions back in the timber were the key. Mississippi, more flat type terrain where we were at, lots of pine woods, and then those lit in this type of area anyway. It was flat pine woods that led into more hardwood creek bottoms. And it seemed like those deer would bed in that transition where the pines and the hardwoods were mixing a lot. And they would watch the creek bottom side. It wasn't always the case, but we essentially, if we were going down there deer hunting, we would look at a map and find out where that transition is, all the way around one of those hardwood draws or hardwood creek bottoms or whatever it is, and then we would walk that transition, looking for bedding, and looking for the most ideal places. You're looking at those transitions, then you're looking at the areas, the transitions like that exist that are really hard to get to or that people are overlooking. But I know it's pretty daunting if you're hunting down there because it's like all these pine woods are just flat pine woods forever, But and those deer live in there, but they definitely like those those cover types mix. Especially if there's a little knob or something back in there with some oaks on it that butts right up to some thick pines, or if you have like different cuts of pines, like different cycle of pines anyway. If a couple of those exist and they butt up to one of those hardwood edges at the bottom, you have three edges that converge there in that one spot, and that's going to be a good spot to look at. That's what I'm assuming, having deer hunt down there. But when we were turkey hunting, we did find a good amount of deer sign when we were down there.
Let's see, we're at 52 minutes, so we can wrap it up here maybe in the next 8 to 10.
We need to discuss the Whitetail tour.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, we're planning right now a public land whitetail tour for this fall. Similar to the way that we did the turkey tour, except we're going to be traveling to hunt deer in multiple states. And we're pretty excited about it. If you guys got any suggestions on where you think we ought to go, you can put them in the comments down there. That'd be fine. we're trying to weigh all of those and kind of see where folks want us to go and where we have the ability to go. Like some of these states out east, I don't know if we're going to be able to afford to get there and back.
Or if our vehicles will even
I don't even know if our vehicles will make it out there. But we're trying to get to at least 5 or 6 states this fall on public land. Hopefully more than that. But turkey's a lot different than deer. You know, it's going to take us a lot longer in these spots probably to deer hunt and try to figure out what's going on. And your typical person has, when they go deer hunt out of state, they usually have, what would you say, a week's vacation?
I'd say so. Probably average.
So that's kind of what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to go to an area for a week to 10 days at a time and hunt. Basically starting in 1st of September.
Yeah. Yeah, this first year, the states that we hunt may be a little bit closer to home, but hopefully if we can continue doing this over the years and we'll branch out a little bit farther, get up into the Northeast, Far East, Southeast. We've got people asking or suggesting Pennsylvania. Lance just suggested Georgia, lots of public land there.
I think we're going to go south this fall. We're pretty sure we're going to go to Alabama. And I would assume that trip is going to be around Thanksgiving to the middle part of December, somewhere in there. And so we are planning to come down to the southeast, at least on one trip. I think we're tentatively planning on going out west to start the year, hunt velvet bucks potentially, and like Nebraska or North Dakota.
North Dakota, yep.
We might also or go to Kentucky during that time. We're weighing that option pretty heavily right now. I've actually been poring over a lot of maps in Kentucky looking for decent public areas that we could potentially hunt during that time frame and then maybe even revisit during the rut.
I got a feeling maybe we'll be a little less picky this year in Iowa.
Oh,
just so we can
oh yeah,
Travel.
Oh yeah,
travel and
like
get out and have some new experiences.
First decent buck comes by me in October's getting an arrow. I don't care where I'm at. I mean, I just want to go. I want to check out.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
I want to check out these new spots.
Scott Reinman says 91 days till deer season. Way to start the countdown, Scott.
We're counting too, buddy. Don't worry. I'm sick of the summer already.
Why do you fellas choose kayaks over canoes? Kayak was easier. I bought one personally. My wife and I bought kayaks. They're easier to throw in the truck, it seems like.
They're easier to portage out of like snags and stuff in the river.
And you can kayak in pretty shallow water. I mean, we've been like 3 or 4 inches of water and been able to get through. It's just they're more stable. They're way more stable.
Oh,
How many times did you guys almost tip the canoe or tip the canoe?
Oh, geez, it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
When me and Zach put that buck in there and then paddled out of there in the ice.
Yeah.
Like, that was borderline suicidal. That was dumb. We had a bow, a stand, and a cooler or something in there, and a buck and 2 dudes in an old rickety canoe.
I remember you telling me that story. About
in the water.
Trying to paddle out of there. Yeah, the water coming over there.
It's like right there, and if we even flinch a little bit of water comes in. So it's like freaky.
Yeah, kayaks are really stable, and we're carrying the camera gear in, and you'd have to tip and drop that in the river or the lake. So
and when you get hung up with a kayak, you just hop out. It floats, and it'll float in an inch of water.
All right. Well, we've reached an hour.
Yeah, and that's typically our time. So, do we have any more questions that we need to get to before we got to run?
Somebody asked if I could describe the grad work I did. Maybe we'll save that for
that could be an entire podcast in its own.
We got a lot of cool information we can talk about there from when we tracked radio collared bucks in Nebraska and Iowa. So we'll save that one for another time.
Ted, what do you think? Is that it?
That's up to you.
Okay. That's it, guys. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll catch you later. We'll catch you next time. Good luck fishing.